Imagine for a second trying to fit the entire rise, fall, and basically the whole transformation of a nation into just 15 presentation slides.
Which is, practically impossible.
Right, it sounds impossible. But imagine you have this flash drive containing 64 years of really complex, multi-dimensional World Bank data for Italy.
From 1960 all the way to 2024.
Exactly. Every single economic indicator, demographic shifts, environmental metrics, and your mandate is to make an audience understand this massive structural evolution.
Of them, just drowning in spreadsheets.
Yeah, or getting distracted by those really flashy, superficial graphics you see in corporate meetings.
Oh, the 3D pie charts. The worst.
Right. Usually when we look at data presentations, there's this expectation of either a totally unreadable data dump or like a highly stylized marketing pitch that just hides the hard truths.
Yeah, it smooths over all the real issues.
Exactly. But today we're doing a deep dive into what is basically a masterclass in data visualization that just entirely rejects both of those extremes.
It really does. It's a fascinating document.
We're going to unpack a highly specific, custom-tailored blueprint. It's this academic-style presentation outlining Italy's socioeconomic and environmental evolution.
And the design rules they used are just as important as the data itself.
Totally. No fluff, no 3D graphics, just stark, undeniable data that reveals a country caught in this massive systemic paradox.
Yeah, and if you are listening to this, whether you're prepping for a data visualization meeting or maybe you're a macroeconomist looking at European trends.
Or honestly, even if you just want to understand how a modern society actually functions under the hood.
Right. This deep dive is going to show you how extreme design constraints actually force us to confront reality.
So let's get into those constraints, because the creator of this deck instituted a really rigid aesthetic philosophy.
They absolutely did. I mean, it's strict.
White backgrounds only, minimalist layouts, flat design, which means, like you said, absolutely no 3D graphics.
No drop shadows, no decorative elements whatsoever.
None. And highly explicit data annotations. Like, if there is a crucial inflection point, there is a stark arrow or a heavy circle drawn directly on it.
Right. And in data science, avoiding visual clutter isn't just about making it look pretty.
No.
No, it prevents the viewer from escaping the raw truth of the data. Like, 3D charts actually distort proportions. They lie to your eyes.
Oh, because of the perspective and everything.
Exactly. And excessive colors just distract the eye.
Yeah.
So by stripping all of that away, the design forces you to look at a story of incredible developmental triumphs that are completely tangled up with deeply rooted structural crises.
It's like turning on the harsh fluorescent lights in a room.
That's a great way to put it.
So let's look at slide 1. The cover itself sets this very serious, almost clinical tone. The title is heavy. It's Macro Data Insights on Italy's Socioeconomic and Environmental Changes, 1960 to 2024.
Very academic, very precise.
Yeah, and based on multidimensional quantitative indicators. And the visual is just an abstract combination of a line graph and a map using only black and dark gray.
It really feels like looking at a medical diagnostic chart or something.
It does. It strips away all the romance we usually associate with Italy. Like, there's no Tuscan sun here, no Colosseum.
Just the geometry of a nation's trajectory.
Right, and that geometry gets formalized immediately on slide 2 in the core summary. The designer splits this entire 64-year history into a flat 4-quadrant layout.
4 pillars of analysis.
Yeah. You have demographics, which the data flags as a severe challenge. You have the macroeconomy, characterized by transition and stagnation.
Then you have the environment, which is surprisingly labeled as the green leap.
Which we will definitely get to, because that part blew my mind. And finally, society and human capital.
Framing it with those 4 quadrants right at the beginning is a deliberate rejection of siloed thinking.
How so?
Well, you cannot understand a country's economic stagnation without simultaneously looking at its demographic collapse.
Right, they feed into each other.
Exactly. And you can't understand its environmental policies without looking at its human capital. I mean, traditional economics often treats these domains separately.
Like labor economists only look at jobs.
Yeah, and climate scientists only look at carbon, sociologists look at education. But this 4-quadrant matrix acts as a visual anchor.
Telling the viewer that these pillars are basically holding up the same roof.
Right. If one buckles, the sheer mathematical weight transfers directly to the others.
And the data makes it incredibly clear that the demographic pillar is buckling under immense weight. I mean, to understand any society, you have to look at the human beings who make it up.
Absolutely. The foundation of everything.
So we move to slide 3. The first major section focuses entirely on demographics, and the very first metric they hit you with is the old age dependency ratio.
Which is a crucial metric.
Just to clarify for everyone listening, this is essentially the ratio of older dependents, so people over 65 to the working age population.
The people actually generating the taxes.
Right. And in 1960, Italy's ratio was 14.5%. But by 2023, it's skyrocketed to 37.4%.
That is a staggering jump.
It really is. And the visual representation is this single axis, smooth line chart. But there is a heavy arrow pointing to the steep, almost vertical slope that ends at that 37.4% peak.
Think about the mechanical reality of that figure for a modern economy. I mean, in 1960, at 14.5%, for every retired person, you had roughly 7 working-age adults.
7 people working for every 1 retired person.
Yeah, generating economic output, paying income taxes, and basically funding the entire social safety net. It's a broad, very stable base.
Like a wide pyramid.
Exactly. But by 2023, you have fewer than 3 working-age adults for every person over 65.
Wow, less than 3.
Yeah. So the financial and productive burden on the individual worker has essentially more than doubled.
And that smooth, steep slope in the visualization, it feels really critical because it emphasizes that this isn't just a cyclical blip.
Right. It wasn't a sudden crisis like a stock market crash.
Yeah, it's a structural compounding shift. Every single year, the slope just gets steeper, and the visual arrow forces your eye to recognize the sheer momentum of that aging process.
It doesn't plateau. It just keeps climbing.
But, I mean, people living longer is generally a good thing, right? It means healthcare is working.
Well, yes, improved life expectancy is a massive human achievement.
But the crisis seems to be coming from the other end of the age spectrum, which is mapped out on slide 4. The designer literally calls it the death cross of fertility and mortality.
Which is a very intense title for an academic slide.
Very. So the data shows the crude death rate climbed above 12 per 1,000 people recently. But at the exact same time, the total fertility rate collapsed from 2.4 births per woman in 1960, straight down to roughly 1.2 today.
A literal halving of the birth rate.
Yeah. And the designer uses a double-line area chart, so blue for fertility, gray for mortality, and they drop this massive glaring circle right on the early 90s where those 2 lines intersect.
Right.
And the label inside the circle simply reads, Natural Population Decline Trap.
The term death cross, it's actually borrowed from finance.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It usually describes when a short-term moving average crosses below a long-term average to signal a bear market. So applying it to human lives is chilling, but statistically it's totally accurate.
Because it means natural population replacement is entirely in the negative.
Consistently. Year after year, more people are dying than are being born.
Yeah.
And visualizing the exact year those lines cross that early 90s inflection point, it creates a really powerful historical anchor.
Right. It shows the viewer that this isn't some abstract future prediction about population decline.
No, it's a structural reality that has been compounding for over 30 years. It's already here.
But why the early 90s, though? Like, what happened in that specific window that caused fertility to just fall off a cliff and never recover?
Well, the early 90s in Italy, and really across much of Southern Europe, was a period of intense economic restructuring. You had this transition away from the traditional single-earner household model. But unlike in Nordic countries where the state stepped in with massive public childcare infrastructure.
Oh, and strong maternity protections?
Exactly. The institutional support in Italy just lagged far behind.
Wow.
So you had young adults facing a rising cost of living, less secure employment contracts, and basically a total lack of childcare.
So they just stopped having kids.
Right. The rational individual economic response to that environment is to delay having children or to just have fewer of them.
Which makes total sense when you put it that way.
And once that behavior becomes the cultural norm
Mm-hmm.
and the base of your population pyramid shrinks, you fall straight into that trap the slide mentions.
Because a smaller generation of children today mathematically guarantees a smaller population of reproductive age adults 20 years from now.
Exactly. It becomes a self-reinforcing downward spiral that is just mathematically impossible to reverse without either massive sustained immigration or a total restructuring of how society funds family life.
Wow. So if the population is aging rapidly and the working base is shrinking because of that 30-year fertility trap, my immediate question is what this does to the macroeconomy.
Which takes us right into the second quadrant.
Yes, slide 5. The designer links the demographic crisis directly to economic stagnation. We're looking at gross national income, or GNI, calculated in constant 2015 dollars.
A very standard, very reliable metric.
And it shows steady growth from the 1970s straight through the 2000s. But right around the 2008 financial crisis, it hits a wall.
A complete wall.
The chart literally turns into a flat, dark gray area with a bracket grouping the entire era from 2008 to 2023 under the label stagnation period.
You know, GNI is the critical metric here because it measures the total domestic and foreign output actually claimed by the residents of the country.
So it's basically the slice of the pie the nation actually gets to take home.
Right. And the flat, dark gray area chart gives the data this feeling of immense heaviness. This stagnation is a failure to grow output in real terms for a decade and a half.
15 years of just nothing.
Yeah. And when you lay this GNI plateau over the previous demographic charts we just talked about, the crisis multiplies.
Because you have an expanding dependent population.
Exactly. Which inherently requires massive, rigid expenditures for pensions and healthcare.
Yeah.
But the economic engine generating the wealth to pay for those things has essentially flatlined.
We actually get a look under the hood of that engine on slide 6, looking at industrial hollowing out.
This slide is really revealing.
The data shows manufacturing value added has dropped significantly, down to around 15% of GDP. And in its place, the service sector has achieved absolute dominance, employing the vast majority of both men and women.
Around 70% of total employment.
Right. The designer maps this out with a 100% stacked bar chart. And they use circles to highlight the shrinking manufacturing block and the expanding service block.
It's very visually striking.
But looking at this, the US and the UK are also dominated by services, right? Isn't a 70% service sector just the standard hallmark of an advanced post-industrial economy?
Well, yes, a shift to services is entirely normal for advanced economies. The vulnerability lies in the specific composition of those services.
What do you mean by composition?
Which becomes obvious when you pair it with that flatlining GNI chart. I mean, if an economy transitions from manufacturing into high-value, knowledge-intensive services...
Like advanced software engineering or global finance.
Exactly. Or biotech research.
Yeah.
If you do that, you typically see massive growth in national income and productivity. But the data indicates Italy's shift relied heavily on lower value-added services.
Like retail and hospitality.
Retail, hospitality, basic administration, and obviously tourism. Now, these sectors are incredibly important and they employ millions of people.
Sure.
But they suffer from what economists call Baumol's cost disease.
Baumol's cost disease.
Yeah. It basically means it is very difficult to increase the productivity of a waiter or a hotel clerk through technology in the same way you can automate a car factory or scale a piece of software.
Oh, I see. A waiter can only serve so many tables an hour no matter what technology you give them.
Precisely. So you get high employment numbers in the service sector, but stagnant overall productivity, which leads directly to stagnant national income.
That makes the structural shift look much more precarious. You have people working, but the value generated per hour worked just isn't scaling up.
Right. The engine is running, but the car isn't going any faster.
And it gets even more complicated when we look at slide 7, their international trade data. Exports of goods and services have climbed to over 30% of GDP.
Which sounds great on paper.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic. It means they are highly integrated into the global economy. But their import dependence is equally high because of global supply chains.
They are very exposed.
The designer uses a bidirectional bar chart here, with exports pushing up from a center line and imports pulling down, and then they overlay it with a net export line.
And those explicit arrows pointing to the extreme volatility in net exports, particularly after 2020.
Right, they really highlight that external shock factor.
Because that global integration is a double-edged sword. I mean, the Made in Italy brand remains globally dominant in high-end machinery, luxury goods, premium food products.
But you can't run a modern economy on exporting luxury bags alone.
No, you definitely cannot. To manufacture those premium goods, and honestly just to fuel the basic infrastructure of the society, they are heavily dependent on importing raw materials.
Intermediate components.
And crucially, energy. When an economy is that tightly woven into global supply chains, while simultaneously suffering from domestic stagnation, it becomes hyperexposed to external shocks.
So like a pandemic or a conflict that spikes natural gas prices or a disruption in shipping lanes, it just suddenly wreaks havoc on the entire system.
Right. Those volatility arrows on the chart aren't just showing mathematical fluctuations. They are highlighting a profound macroeconomic vulnerability.
Yeah, because when import costs for energy or raw materials spike, a stagnant domestic economy doesn't have the internal demand to absorb those costs.
Exactly.
Huh.
The profit margins of their manufacturing base get totally squeezed. And because they rely so much on external energy, they are effectively at the mercy of global geopolitical weather.
Which makes the data in the third quadrant, slides 8 and 9, so incredibly surprising to me.
Oh, this is the best part of the whole presentation.
We've just mapped out a shrinking, aging population, a totally stagnant macroeconomy, and a highly vulnerable trade position. It's a gloomy picture.
Very gloomy.
But then we hit the environment quadrant, which the designer labels the green leap. And the data here reveals a massive, undeniable structural transformation.
It's a huge success story.
Total carbon dioxide emissions dropped from a peak of nearly 493 megatons in 2005 down to under 300 megatons recently.
That is a staggering drop.
The visual is a stepped descending bar chart, kind of looking like a staircase going down. And the designer draws a single massive arrow directly from the 2005 peak column all the way down to the most recent column.
Just highlighting the sheer magnitude of that reduction.
Exactly. And the slide specifically notes that this data excludes LULUCF.
Which is an extremely important detail for the data nerds listening.
Yeah, can you explain what that actually means?
Sure. So LULUCF stands for land use change, and forestry. In national carbon accounting, if you plant a massive forest, it naturally absorbs carbon.
Right. Trees breathe in CO2.
Exactly. And that absorption offsets your industrial emissions on a spreadsheet. But by explicitly excluding LULUCF from this chart, the designer is forcing us to look purely at the physical emissions generated by the industrial, energy, and societal engines of the country.
So this isn't just an accounting trick achieved by planting a million trees.
No, not at all. A drop from 493 to under 300 megatons without counting forests represents a fundamental physical reduction in the carbon intensity of their actual economy.
It is a massive achievement for a major industrialized nation.
It really is.
And the mechanics of how they achieve that drop are detailed on slide 9, looking at the electricity generation data. Fossil fuel consumption, which was over 93% back in 1960, has just plummeted.
While renewables went the exact opposite direction.
Yeah, renewable energy exploded from under 1% to over 20% of total electricity generation. And again, this data explicitly excludes hydroelectric power.
Because hydro has been around forever in Italy.
Great. So we are talking specifically about the rapid new deployment of wind, solar, and geothermal power.
And the visual here is brilliant.
It's a combination chart. You have a declining line for fossil fuels on the left and surging vertical bars for solar and wind on the right, with a massive arrow highlighting the exponential growth curve post-2010.
The contrast here is, I think it's the most fascinating paradox in the entire presentation.
Why is that?
Well, we just established that macroeconomic policy has been essentially paralyzed since 2008, right? Totally unable to generate meaningful GDP growth.
Right, the dark gray stagnation plateau.
Exactly. Yet in that exact same time frame, the state executed a highly complex, capital-intensive, exponential transformation of its energy grid.
Oh, wow. I didn't even put those two timelines together.
Yeah, it demonstrates a critical lesson about state capacity. Broad macroeconomic reform requires changing the behavior of millions of individual businesses, reforming tax codes, shifting cultural labor norms.
Which is like trying to turn a battleship with a paddle.
Exactly. It's incredibly difficult. But transforming an energy grid, that is an infrastructure and targeted policy problem.
So the state can just implement aggressive feed-in tariffs or subsidize solar panels directly?
Right. Or issue EU-backed directives to build massive wind farms. They bypassed the stagnant broader economy by using targeted, top-down industrial policy to drive a systemic green transition.
So it proves that a state can still engineer massive historical change in specific sectors even when the broader system is stuck in the mud.
That is exactly the takeaway.
That is a phenomenal distinction to make. You can't just pass a law that forces consumers to spend more money to boost GDP, and you definitely can't legislate a higher birth rate.
No, you cannot.
But you absolutely can pass a law that shifts billions in capital into building massive solar farms. It's a triumph of engineering and specific policy over broader structural malaise.
It is. It's incredibly impressive. But as the designer moves us into the fourth and final quadrant, We really have to ask why that targeted success hasn't spilled over.
Right. Why can't the state use that same capacity to fix the economy?
And the answer to that lies in society and human capital.
This is where the presentation gets truly complex and honestly a bit tragic. Slides 10 and 11 detail an incredible success story in education.
A really high baseline.
Adult literacy is near 99%. Primary school enrollment is over 97%, and the transition rate to junior high is near 100%.
Basically universal education.
The designer uses a minimalist gauge chart, and they just put a massive greater than 99% in the center. It shows a state that has successfully provided a high-quality baseline of education to its entire population.
But the real nuance, the really interesting part, is in higher education.
Yes, slide 11. Female gross enrollment in universities significantly outpaces male enrollment. The visual is a back-to-back butterfly bar chart comparing male versus female enrollment.
With an explicit arrow highlighting the growing female advantage.
A butterfly chart is the perfect minimalist tool here, right? You have a central spine with male bars extending left and female bars extending right.
Yeah, it allows the viewer to instantly weigh the two demographics against each other without any mental math.
And the arrow highlighting the female advantage is vital because it totally shifts our understanding of the nation's human capital. The country's future intellectual base, its most highly trained minds, are overwhelmingly female.
Which is a huge shift from, say, the 1960s.
Completely. And this population isn't just educated, they are healthy and digitally connected. Slide 12 shows healthcare spending as a rigid, growing expenditure, rising from 7.5% of GDP in 2000 to over 9.5% today.
And the visual for that one.
It's a bubble scatter plot, where the size of the bubble represents total spend, and the trend line shows unyielding upward growth.
And we should note that massive public health investment has yielded some of the best national health outcomes and life expectancies in the world.
Right. And alongside health, on slide 13, we see digital connectivity. Fixed broadband adoption went from less than 1 subscriber per 100 people in the year 2000 to over 31 today.
That's a huge leap.
The designer maps this with a gradient-filled S-curve. So it shows the slow takeoff, the steep climb of adoption, and then the flat saturation phase at the top.
It's a classic technology adoption curve.
Exactly. So to summarize the societal reality we've just seen, you have a population that is highly educated, exceptionally healthy, and totally plugged into the modern digital economy.
Which brings us to the pivot.
Yeah.
The most devastating slide in the entire deck.
Slide 14, titled The Fatal Flaw in the Labor Market. We have this incredible reservoir of human capital. But what happens when these highly educated, healthy, connected people actually try to enter the workforce?
The data shows a catastrophic failure.
Despite the massive educational advantage we just saw for women on the butterfly chart, female labor force participation is stubbornly stuck right around 40%.
That is painfully low for an advanced economy.
And the data for the youth is just as grim. Young people, ages 15 to 24, who are not in employment, education, or training the NEET rate.
Right.
It fluctuates at a persistently high 16% to 24%.
And the design choice here was what makes it hit so hard. The designer uses side-by-side box plots to visualize this historical data.
Why box plots specifically?
Well, a box plot essentially draws a tight visual fence around where the vast majority of the population sits over a long period of time. By using this over a multi-decade time series, the designer isn't showing a trend line moving up or down.
They're showing the absence of a trend.
Exactly. They're visualizing absolute structural rigidity. The fence containing female labor participation never moves up. The fence containing youth unemployment never moves down.
Millions of people are literally trapped in these statistical boxes decade after decade.
It's incredibly frustrating to look at.
But why? If the state is spending billions educating women and youth, why is the labor market rejecting them? Like, where is the disconnect?
It comes down to structural rigidity in the labor market itself and a severe lack of inclusive social policies.
Can you break that down?
Sure. The Italian labor market has historically been characterized by a very strong insider-outsider dynamic.
Okay, who are the insiders?
Insiders are typically older, predominantly male workers with highly protected permanent contracts. It's very hard to fire them. Their benefits are locked in.
And the outsiders?
Outsiders are the youth and women trying to enter the market, who are often only offered precarious, short-term contracts with low wages and virtually no security.
Oh, wow. So they can't get a foothold.
Right. And furthermore, we talked earlier about the lack of childcare infrastructure that drove the fertility collapse in the 90s.
Yes, the population trap.
Well, that same lack of infrastructure makes it incredibly difficult for women to maintain continuous careers. The system inherently penalizes career breaks.
So you have a highly educated female population that is essentially forced to choose between having a family or navigating a hostile, inflexible labor market.
Exactly. Many are just structurally sidelined.
Think of an economy as a specialized high-performance engine. You can pour in all the high-octane fuel you want, in this case, massive state investments in university education, universal health care, and digital infrastructure.
But if the transmission, the labor market is missing crucial gears, the wheels simply won't turn.
Right. The power never makes it to the road.
And this is where the entire deep dive synthesizes. Look at the tragedy of that broken transmission. You have a quarter of your youth sidelined. You have the majority of your women out of the formal labor force.
Because they aren't working, they aren't generating the income, the innovation, or the tax revenue needed to support the rapidly aging population we saw in Quadrant 1.
The burden of that 37.4% old age dependency ratio is resting on a completely artificially shrunken base of workers.
Which mathematically guarantees the G&I stagnation we saw in Quadrant 2. It is a massive interconnected loop.
A feedback loop of stagnation.
And the designer lands the plane by making that exact causal loop explicit on the final slide. Slide 15, conclusion and outlook.
It's a brilliant wrap-up.
They use a flat, four-grid SWOT matrix, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. But instead of bullet points, they embed microbar charts directly into the text blocks.
Keeping the data front and center even in the conclusion.
Under strengths, it lists the low-carbon energy transition and the accumulation of solid human capital. Under weaknesses, the irreversible aging and the severe labor supply bottlenecks for women and youth.
But the true genius of the final slide is the use of explicit arrows linking the quadrants.
Drawing it all together.
Yeah, good data visualization isn't just about making numbers look clean. It's about forcing clarity of thought. By restricting themselves to minimal design and clear arrows, the designer had absolutely nowhere to hide fuzzy logic.
They drew a literal causal chain across the slide.
Exactly. It literally reads, demographic structure points to labor supply constraints, which points to economic stagnation. They are explicitly stating the mechanism of the crisis.
You can't just throw your hands up and say, oh, well, the economy is just bad right now.
Oh, right. Because the data proves exactly how the aging population interacts with the structural barriers, keeping women and youth out of the workforce, which in turn mathematically creates the flatlining national income.
It is a single undeniable causal equation distilled from 64 years of data. And the implication section of the matrix makes the policy solution painfully clear.
What's their final recommendation?
To break a decade and a half of economic stagnation, you cannot just try to stimulate GDP in a vacuum. You have to merge Social Security reform, the digital economy, and highly inclusive labor practices.
If you do not fix the structural barriers preventing women and youth from participating in the economy, no amount of green energy or advanced healthcare will save the macroeconomy from the demographic cliff.
The silos have to be broken down. The labor policies must talk to the demographic realities. The data simply leaves no room for any other conclusion.
It really doesn't. It's an airtight argument.
For you listening, you've just seen how disparate data points from carbon megatons and fossil fuel percentages, to fertility rates and broadband access, to female university enrollment and youth unemployment can all be woven into a cohesive, undeniably powerful story about a nation's trajectory.
It shows that everything is connected.
You've seen how stripping away the visual noise, the 3D graphics, and the corporate marketing fluff actually amplifies the hard truth of the mechanisms driving our world. Find the paradoxes in the data and follow the causal chains.
It's the only way to really understand what's happening.
Before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. When we looked at those rigid box plots of sidelined youth and women juxtaposed against near-perfect literacy and university enrollment, it paints a picture of what we might call a ghost economy.
A ghost economy.
Yeah. A massive reserve of human potential that is trained, healthy, connected, but structurally invisible to the GDP. The data clearly shows that investing heavily in education without simultaneously tearing down the cultural and structural barriers in the labor market creates a phantom workforce.
Wow.
So, what does it mean for the future of any developed nation, not just the one in this data set, if its most educated, most digitally connected generation is structurally locked out of the very engine needed to drive the society forward?
Yeah.
Who ultimately gets to write the next chapter of a nation's history? The people sitting at the table or the ghosts waiting outside? Keep diving deep.